Hi, good evening, everyone. Can someone I'm being heard? Can anyone hear me? Okay, so good evening. Of course, we're all welcome to class. I would, as usual, we're going to give a 5 minutes break for, not break per se, 5 minute grace for those who have not joined us to join. So please, we can remind our party members that it's time so we can get started. And we're going to start at exactly 5:05. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. Can I still need feedback to know that I'm being heard? Okay, so we're all welcome to class as usual. My name is Peace Dukas, and today is going to be another interesting conversation. We'll be talking about constitutional development in Nigeria. And as usual, before we introduce our facilitator, I would love to read his bio, then hand over the mic to him. So I'll briefly read his profile before I hand over to him. So our facilitator for today is Ibiang Livinus. He's currently a public health and biosafety expert, a professional in politics with over 19 years working in the social sector to strengthen institutional reforms that can lead to social change. He has led several student youth movements and have been involved in human rights advocacy. He was a former FCT interim chairman of Alliance for New Nigeria Party, and it was under his leadership that the party built the structure at the local government and ward level before his ascension to the office of the national vice chairman of the party for the South South zone after the national convention in 2018. In this capacity, he served in several committees, prominent amongst which is the Security Committee, which he chaired, the Partnership Committee with other parties for the general elections in 2019. He was also a member of the National Campaign Council of the party and served as the South South Zonal Director and chairman of the national campaign. Ibiang is a graduate of the University of Calabar and holds several certifications in his chosen field. He holds, in addition, a master's in business administration from Amadou Bello University and is currently a PhD candidate in international public health. Please join me using emojis to put your hands together as we welcome our facilitator for today. Sir, you have the mic.
Thank you very much. Peace and good evening, everyone. Once again, it's my pleasure to be here with us on this very special cohort. And today we'll be looking at the history of constitutional development in Nigeria from 1914 to date. My appreciation again to the leadership of the Electoral College through the AD and the management and staff of the Electoral College for the opportunity provided to teaming Nigerians to become politically literate and contribute meaningfully to political events and development in Nigeria. I think this is very important. And for some of us who are participating at this level, we find this very novel and want to commend the college and to continue to admonish the participants to take whatever we're doing here very seriously as they go back. Having said that, we'll go straight into the business of the day. This is just an outline. First, as an overview, I'd like to place on record that Nigeria's constitutional evolution clearly reflects transition from colonial rule to self-governance, including issues of independence, military interregnums, and of course, the return to democracy. And it's also important to know that each of the constitutional milestones we have detailed in this presentation clearly reflects Nigerians' search for balance between unity, diversity, federalism, and centralism. And as we proceed in our presentation, we'll begin to see why these concepts are very important. Finally, as an objective for this particular course, we want to be able to trace and analyze the evolution of Nigeria's constitution from 1900 to perhaps the present democratic dispensation. And that's why we are looking at this. But before, again, there is something very fundamental to constitutional development. And first of all, we must understand what a constitution is, so that we then begin to see how the evolutionary phases have led to what we now have as constitution. So what is constitution? Constitution is fundamentally a legal document that outlines the basic principles and laws governing a country or organization. In fact, it is the supreme law that outlines both the structure, the powers, and the functions of government, and also guarantees, importantly, citizens' rights. You cannot have a constitution that does not guarantee citizens' rights, because democracy is about the citizens, it's about the people. In the words of Oyediran, a researcher, he noted that not only that a constitution is descriptive of the allocation of powers between levels of government and various positions and responsibilities, it is also legalistic in nature. So constitution is a legal document, and which is why if you go to the court on any matter, reference is first made to the constitution because it's a legal document. Even the court is able to sit because it is provided for in the constitution. So that's why it's a legal document, according to Yedro. A famous constitutional lawyer, Professor Ben Wabwezi, poses that a constitution is an act of the people, and I underlined it. So please take note. It is an act of the people. So the people must give themselves a constitution if it is made by them. So you can only say it is an act of the people if it is made by the people, either directly in a referendum or through a convention or constituent assembly, where representatives are elected to go to a constituent assembly, discuss, deliberate, espouse, research, and come up with a constitution. This is what Wabweze, had to say about the constitution. I'm sure the emphasis I've made thus far will stir some our speculative interests to begin to look at constitution differently from what we've always known it to be. It is a ground norm and serves as a supreme law. We've mentioned that. And we say the search for the framework. What is the framework? The structure, the arms of government, the organization of government, the branches, the powers and responsibilities. Then the functioning, which include the lawmaking process, the implementation process, the enforcement, and the interpretation. These define functionality. Functionality as opposed to structure. So these two, very key. And then it prescribes the principles of governance. What are the principles of governance? The rule of law, the separation of powers, as dictated by Baron Montesquieu in his work. So he clearly gives the separation of powers. And this is what our constitution also prescribes for us to have good governance. And then we talked about the rights of the citizens. So it made provision for fundamental rights, protect individual liberties and rights such as freedom of speech, assembly, religion, association, the freedom to walk around. So there are so many of them, so many fundamental rights of the citizens that the Constitution guaranteed. And then every constitution set forth process for its amendment or revision, as the case may be. And finally, there is a line in the Constitution that dictates the supremacy of that Constitution. That has to be there. It has to be there. And that law, that line, that clause in our Constitution clearly states that if any other law is inconsistent with the provisions of our Constitution, that other law, whether it is an act of the National Assembly or judicial pronouncement or edicts or laws made by the local government, if they are inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution, that that other law shall, to the extent of her inconsistency, be null and void. That is the supremacy of the Constitution. Very interesting, very important. Now, just some historical context, again, for us to understand where we started out from. There are two major periods, the pre-independence period and then the independence period, and then the post-independence period, so 3 periods. Now, in the pre-independence period, what happened? These were largely the period of the colonial rule. And this period featured, some researchers say it is 5 constitutions, some say it is 4. But let us look at it and see if there are actually 5 constitutions in the pre-independence period that we have in Nigeria. First of all, in 1886, there was a charter. A charter is an instrument of government that proclaims and gives power to either an individual or an institution or agency. So there was a charter of the British government that granted the RNC. RNC is Royal Niger Company, to administer the protected territories in northern Nigeria. Now, very important, please take note. The RNC, the Royal Niger Company, was founded by a gentleman called George Tubman Goldie. He owned that company, and he was granted a charter by the British government to administer the protected territories of, northern Nigeria. Then, of course, as you know, there is nothing like Nigeria. So it was basically the northern region where the British people first made entry into. And then in 1899, the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria was established following a revised charter in 1899. And then we had the Oil River Protectorate, which was established in 1893 and later changed to the Niger Coast Protectorate. In 1900, the Southern Protectorate was proclaimed. Now, you follow this history. Before 1900, Lagos was a colony. Calabar was also a colony. And then we have the Oil River Protectorate, which was established in 1893. But something happened. In 1900, in 1900, people call it 1900, 1900, the Southern Protectorate was proclaimed because it witnessed the fusion of the colony of Lagos and the other southern protected territories to form what you call the Southern Protectorate, which include both the Oil River Protectorate, the Calabar, and of course, the colony of Lagos. And then in 1906, we had the first attempt to build a nation when the colony of Lagos and the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria were amalgamated into a Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. In 1912, Sir Frederick Lugard returned as the governor of both the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria and the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. So there were 2 protectorates, the Northern and the Southern Protectorates, and Lugard was administering these protectorates. And then in 1914, for convenience of administration, Lord Lugard amalgamated both the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria and the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria to now have what we called Nigeria, and which was still a colony of the British Empire. So that's what happened, just some historical background. Now, what were the major developments of this pre-independence era? One, we had Sir Lord Frederick Lugard, who in 1914 amalgamated Nigeria and governed this area called Nigeria by providing opportunity for the expression of public opinion through a non-legislative council. And this council was largely advisory, so it wasn't like he was obligated to, take whatever the council provided. And only matters of interest, of course, I discussed, but very fundamental to this whole process is the fact that there was a council which was, made up of both Nigerians and other Europeans. And the way the council were constituted was that there were 23 European officials, 13 non-officials who are made up of 7 Europeans and 6 Nigerians nominated to represent the coastal districts as well as the interior of the country. This was exactly how that council was largely constituted. And these 6 Nigerians consisted of 2 emirs from the north, then the Alafin of Oyo, and 1 member each from Lagos and Calabar. Don't forget, Lagos and Calabar were very important areas under the British uh, colonial rule at the time. And then we had the Benin Wari area. Of course, 1 representative from the Benin Wari area, 1 from the Lagos, Calabar, and then the Alafin of Oyo, of course. So that's how the 6 nominees were. So, and then Lord Lugard's term in office came to an end, and then we had, of course, the Sir Hawkeye Clifford's regime. Now, like I said, some researchers hold that whatever Lugard governed the country with, even though not written, still, could be considered as part of a constitutional development process or evolution process, because you had some of the structures he had in place at the time. But what is very clear to us at the time is that the instrument of authority was what we call the order in council, which is usually issued by the queen, okay, to whoever is her representative in any of the colonies that person is going to govern. So that person governs by what we call the order in council. It is a charge and usually documented. So Sir Clifford and Sir Clifford, of course, the Clifford Constitution derives its name from this gentleman who was, also a governor of Nigeria as a colony of the British government. So what were some of the key features of Richard's administration at the time? It was Sir Richard Clifford, who of course introduced what we call the elective principle for the first time, where 4 Africans, were elected into some sort of legislative council. So he established the first formal constitution in Nigeria and introduced the elective principle for the first time. And this, of course, sparked the rise of political associations like the Nigerian National Democratic Party. If you cast your mind back to when we did political parties and structure, you discover that it was about this time we started having, that consciousness for political party formation at the time. So this was what led to the formation of those political parties. It was because of Sir Clifford's constitution, which set in motion all of those. What were other features of this constitution? It created a legislative council with limited representation anyway, which was largely populated by educated elites at the time. Of course, what do you expect? You want people who can be able to match intellectually with the colonial masters at the time. And then, according to Oyeleye, for the first time in Nigeria, Lagos and Calabar were granted the right to vote in an election into the Legislative Council. And we had 4 elected Nigerians that came from both Lagos and Calabar. You recall we talked about when we were doing political parties and structure, we said franchise was granted only to Lagos and Calabar. So this was the reason, because the Constitution only provided for elections in these 2 places. 3 seats were allotted to Lagos and 1 seat was allotted to Calabar, apart from Lagos, it highlights that Calabar status as an intellectual center at the time. But it should also be noted that Calabar was the capital of the Oil River Protectorate. Of course, so when you talk about the Oil River Protectorate, Calabar was the headquarters at the time, created by the British in 1891, which was later renamed in 1893 as the Niger Coast Protectorate before they were now all fused together to form the Southern Protectorate. So, of course, Sir Clifford's constitution stimulated political awareness and nationalist movements, and which laid the groundwork for future agitation. So people became conscious that they could actually agitate for something and it could come, to be. So kudos to, Sir Clifford's constitution. And then we had Sir Otto Richard. Sir Otto Richard became governor of Nigeria, and in 1946 also attempted, to improve on what he met on ground. And what were the key features of the Richardson, what usually called Richardson Constitution? One was an attempt to create establish the executive and the legislative councils and expanded their representation. So he made representation even bigger. Richardson Constitution recognized the diverse ethnic groups within the created regions of North, South, and East. These were the three regions that were created as a result of the Richardson Constitution. And that constitution recognized the presence of, diverse ethnic groups in Nigeria. So this is really progress, And then we had, there were regional councils, regional legislative councils were also established, but they did not have full legislative status. So the central legislature actually still make laws for the entire country. And then it also set the stage for increased political engagement and the agitations for regional autonomy. So if you've created a what do you call it? If you've created regional councils or assembly, as it were, there is need to then grant them some level of autonomy to be able to operate and legislate over matters that affects them. So you could see that creation now set forth the stage for further engagement and the agitations for regional autonomy. But it's important to know that this very Richardson Constitution was widely criticized because of lack of consultation. Whereas the intentions were good, recognizing regional councils or the need to have regional council, it was done by fiat, dished out like a token to the people. And that's why our foremost nationalists at the time agitated and criticized those provisions because they did not contribute to it. And of course, you'll be asking, why would they have to agitate? Because they have an understanding of what a constitution is. Remember, we started out by defining a constitution. And we said, it is a constitution if it is drafted by the people. So the people must be involved. And that's the basis for all of the agitations that, followed the Richardson Constitution. So he ruled for that period until in 1951, we had Sir John Maferson, of course, Constitution, and which was usually very popularly referred to as the Maferson Constitution. And this constitution was marked by unprecedented public consultation. Of course, if the previous constitution was criticized for lack of consultation, it's only expected that there will be amends, to that process to ensure that this time around there is inclusion, there is wide, consultation. Nigerians were involved in the process for, what will eventually evolve as a more improved constitution to what we had of the Richardson Constitution. And The order in council established a central legislature made up of single chamber called the House of Representatives. So there wasn't a Senate, it was House of Rep. And then the regional houses represented by 136 members. So this is really unprecedented. So the number of representation in governance had increased tremendously, given that you have both um, people in the House of Representatives at the center and, of course, at the regional um, level. Um, this constitution also gave more autonomy to regional governments and introduced some sort of quasi-federal structure. Okay, so we had there was an executive council consisting of the chief commissioners of each of the three regions, the attorney general, financial secretary, director, medical services, director, education, and others nominated by the governor. Okay, and this constitution also approved bicameral legislature for the western region of Nigeria and the northern region through an order in council. Remember, I mentioned that whoever is representing the queen and who is governing any colony receives a charge, which is, of course, the order in council to govern that place. And it provided for establishing more political parties like the action group. So as we go through this constitutional evolution, think about what we did in the political parties and structure. What was the period that the action group came to be? What was the period that the NPC came to be? What were the alignments that took place thereafter, after the establishment of those political parties? And we did say, when we were doing political parties and structure, that those political parties were clear expressions of regional blocks. Now, what were those regional blocks? Those regional blocks were the creations of this constitution that recognized the different regions, the northern region, the western region, and the eastern region. That was clearly what was happening at the time. And you could tell the political parties that were predominantly in operation at the time. The north had the NPC, the west had the action group, and the east has the NCNC. So you can see how the whole thing now is falling into place. Now, but there were shortcomings in spite of, this development. And what are they? The constitution did not last long. That's one. There were moves to actually move a motion for the establishment of independence of Nigeria. And those moves, of course, were, countered by the Northern Group. Now, so those were some of the shortcomings. The fact that Mafasin didn't last long. Perhaps if he lasted longer, we would have had a more comprehensive and better constitution. But let's see what happened after Mafasin Constitution. Of course, we had the Oliver Littleton Constitution of 1954. Very interestingly, this one fully established Nigeria's federal system, clearly separated central and regional government. So there were two constitutional, Nigeria became a federation comprising 5 units made up of North, Northern, Eastern, Western, then the Federal Territory of Lagos, and the Southern Cameroons. Southern Cameroons were originally part of Nigeria. That was why when Abat Macaulay started his NCNC, then it was National Council of Nigerians and Cameroons. So Southern Cameroon was part of, Nigeria at the time before they were ceded off to Cameroon. So there was the creation of a Federal Council of Ministers whose members had to be selected from amongst the members of the Federal House of Representatives. So you could see how the ministers were selected from among the elected members of the House of Representatives. And then we had the allocation of legislative powers to 2 tiers of government. One is the central government, and then the other was the regional government. So that was how the federal system was actually, created, because federalism is about recognizing those confederating units or federating units, not confederacy, because confederacy is a different thing, and confederacy talks about vassal states, states that are not strongly bound to a particular country. They could break off at any time. That's confederacy. But when you talk about federating unit, you are talking about those regions that are, part of a component, a country, as it were. So this constitution recognizes that structure, the central government and the regional government. Now, there were some very interesting things that happened preparatory to the 1960, because we have the 1960 Constitution. Preparatory to that was, there were several conferences that were taking place. Remember, we said a constitution is usually drafted either through a referendum by the people or through a constituent assembly. So there were conferences taking place at this time. The political activities in the country had, taken a wider dimension. There was a lot of inclusion. People are involved in the governance of the country at the time, but then still under a colonial rule. Now, there were some conferences, very important conferences that took place. First was the 1957 conference, which held in London. The first constitutional conference held in London between May 23 to June 26 in 1957. The major issues discussed were around creation of states like the Midwest State, Cross River State, and the Middle Belt states. These were some of the major issues that dominated the 1957 conference. Like the Western and Northern regions, the Eastern region also got a bicameral legislature at the conference. So that conference approved the establishment of a bicameral legislature in the Eastern region. It was also agreed that the office of the Prime Minister for the Federation be created. Don't forget, it was a colonial rule. So, and the previous constitution we talked about established the, some sort of parliamentary system of governance. And so in a parliamentary system of government, you have the prime minister, who is the head of government, and then you have the queen, who is a titular head, what you call a ceremonial, leadership. But of course, she is like what you would have called the president. She's a queen and the titular head. And that the Eastern and Western region become self-governing immediately after the conference, while the Northern region becomes self-governing in 1959. So these were some of the key decisions that were made at the 1957 conference. In 1958, there was also another conference, and the Constitutional Conference held from September 29 to October 27 in 1958 in London. The main issues for discussions were, one, the recommendations of the Minorities Commission. This commission was basically set up in the 1957 conference to address the fears of the minorities by the majority ethnic groups like the Igbos, Yoruba, Amin, and Hausas. Now, these were the three major ethnic groups. It does not mean that these were the only ethnic groups at the time. Don't forget that there was the Richardson Constitution that recognized the diverse ethnic groupings within the country. And so the minority groups were already beginning to cry foul because they were concerned about domination by the major ethnic groups. So it was a big issue that came up and had to be discussed. So a commission was established, which was called the Minorities Commission, to actually look into this. The issues of self-governance for the northern Nigeria was also, discussed. Remember, the governance for the northern region was deferred in the 1957 conference until 1959. So to keep all of those in focus, it came up again in the 1958 conference. And then the request for independence was also made. Made to the United Kingdom, the British government in 1957, and that also was an issue for discussion in 1958. We had 106 persons variously classified as delegates, advisors, and officials who were at the conference. And the conference recorded decisions on fundamental human rights, the establishment of the Nigerian police. Don't forget, before the Nigerian police were governed by the British constabulary. So now was an opportunity to have an indigenous police force. And then the issues of self-governance for the northern Nigeria, the position of Lagos, the southern Cameroon's electoral arrangements were also discussed. Fiscal arrangements, minorities problem, and Nigerian independence were all the very fundamental issues that were discussed at the time. One of the major highlights at this 1958 conference was the colonial secretary, Alan Lennox Boyd, who presided over the conference and declared the promise of Her Majesty the Queen to grant independence to Nigeria on October 1, 1960. I mean, gentlemen and ladies, if you were part of that era and you were attending this conference, imagine yourself as you are seated wherever you are in this very conference, that kind of news was, delivered to the conference attendees that Nigeria will become independent. So the agitations by our foremost nationalists, those we actually referred to as our heroes past, was, coming to fruition. And the 1960 Nigeria was going to become an independent nation. And then came the 1960 Independence Constitution. So even though there were two major constitutional conferences that preceded this constitution, it retained some of the trappings of a colonial document. Key highlights were as follows. These were the key highlights of the 1960 constitution. One, it created the three regions of the Northeast West. So that was also provided for in the 1960 constitution. Nigeria became an independent state within the Commonwealth of Nations. It retained the British parliamentary system because we had the Prime Minister office, which was created as discussed in the 1958 Constitutional Conference in London, and also retained the Queen as the titular head or ceremonial head. And it set forth Nigeria's transition to self-governance and, of course, independence from the British government and colonial rule, and recognized, of course, human rights, just like other constitutions did. So Nigerian police force was also created in the constitution. It was provided for in the constitution, and it also set forth power sharing between the federal and the region in clearly defined terms. But of course, as an evolutionary process, that constitution also has its limitation. And if I open the floor for us to actually contribute to what those limitations are, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of views. But just to save us the time, one of the major limitations of that constitution is the fact that sovereignty was not absolute. And this was largely because the Queen was still the ceremonial head of the country. Okay, so that doesn't grant full sovereignty. Sovereignty, if you say a country is sovereign, it means the country is self-governing in its strictest form. So it's not like someone from another country would then be the one governing that country. No. So that's just one of the major limitations of that constitution. But clearly, it's actually marked the triumph of our nationalist struggle led by the likes of Nnamdi Azikiwe, Tafawa Balewa, and so on and so forth, Awolowo, and co. So all of these are foremost nationalists worked together to ensure that Nigeria got independent. We never will forget the motion that was moved by Chief Anthony Anahoro in 1953 for the establishment of the independence of Nigeria. And then we had the 1963 Constitution, where Nigeria became a sovereign republic, and we had the office of the president replacing the Queen. It used to be the Queen who is seated as the ceremonial head, and then we had the Prime Minister. But this time around, in 1963, Nigeria became a republic, and had full sovereignty. We had the president who was in charge, and then it maintained the parliamentary system because we had the president in the person of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe and we had the prime minister in the person of Sabaka Tafawa Balewa. So it maintained that parliamentary system. But then, of course, Nigeria was a republic. And all of these were provided for in the constitution. So we had a federal structure, we adopted the presidential system with an executive branch and of course a prime minister. We also have a parliament which was bicameral in nature, and of course we had a judiciary. So these were clear features of that 1963 constitution. One of the major challenge of the 1963 constitution is the fact that there was political crisis. There was issues with census that was conducted, disputes in the census figures. There were ethnic conflicts, which led to, of course, instability. And of course, we had subsequently the 1966 coup that took place and then bringing in the military regime. So I put here that we had military rule and constitutional development. So we had a military coup, which took place in 1966. And this, of course, impacted on governance significantly. However, there were 3 constitutions midwifed by the military administrations. And, we will also look at that. One was the 1979 Constitution. The 1979 Constitution was midwifed by the military. The military, as part of the transition to the Second Republic, midwife the 1979 Constitution when it set up the Constituent Assembly to, discuss the provisions and the content of the 1979 Constitution. So that Constitution actually adopted what we call the presidential system of governance. So we moved away from the parliamentary system where we had the president as well as prime minister. We now have the presidential system of government. So it was that 1979 constitution that laid that foundation. And it is modeled after the United States system to prevent instability of, parliamentary rule. And then that constitution also promoted national unity by requiring the president to win a broad geographic mandate. It was that constitution that provided that to become president, you must win, 25% of the votes in 2/3 of the states. So it's so that you don't have a president that come from one, just elected by just one region. We wanted to have a president that is elected by the entire, country. So it was that 1979 constitution that provided that provision. Now, in addition, it's important to also understand that this 1979 constitution abolished the parliamentary system. It clearly adopted the US presidential system, providing for the executive branch, the legislature, which of course is bicameral in nature, and of course the judiciary. A major challenge of this period is the fact that we had the issues around corruption, there was economic decline. Don't forget, somewhere in 1977, we had the oil boom period, and but then all of those, this oil boom and all of the revenue that Nigeria made was squandered one way or the other. And this, of course, was what led to another military incursion in the political governance of our country, because even though the MPN under with Alhaji Shehu Shagari of blessed memory won the elections in 1979, and they governed until 1983, and then had another election which was then truncated by the Muhammad Buhari's military junta as a result of the allegations of corruption, economic decline, political violence during the elections. So this led to military takeover in 1983. And we had Muhammad Buhari, who then governed the country from 1983 to 1985. And in 1985, then Major General Muhammadu Buhari became the president. Please, just a second. Apologies, please. So, um, General Muhammad Ibrahim Badamos Babangida took over from General Muhammadu Buhari through a coup and governed until 1993 after the annulment of the June 12 election, which he oversaw and left the scene. But before then, he he made attempt to also midwife another constitution in 1989. This constitution is hardly ever mentioned because it was in a draft. It was never signed or decreed into law. And it was drafted under Babangida. It provided some of the key features was the provision of two-party system, which were the NRC and SDP, which contested the election. The presidential structure was also maintained, just like we had in the 1979 Constitution. But it was never implemented due to the annulment of the 1993 elections, which saw which were declared the freest and fairest elections, from which MK Abiola, of course, of the Social Democratic Party, won that election. So that's usually why you never hear of the 1989 Constitution, because it was in draft, never signed into law. And when the elections were annulled in 1993, just for us to get some background, for the benefit of those who may not really know what happened at the time, after the June 12 elections, the Babangida's regime annulled that election. This precipitated the country into, chaos. There were serious agitations at the time. And following that, what Babangida did was to stylishly set up what they called the interim national government, completely alien to 1979 constitution. And the interim national government was not a product of our constitution. And so there were lots of litigations against it until eventually, because of the litigations, Chief Enoshonukon, who was the then chairman of the interim national government, found it very difficult to actually govern the country because of, some of the many issues. What happened? The most ranking officer within the military, who was the Secretary of Defense in the person of General Sani Abacha, saw an opportunity because of the crisis and overthrew Chief Enoshonukon and became the head of state of Nigeria. And he governed until 1998 when he died. So following his death, there were consultations that took place, and General Abdusalami Abubakar, who was the chief of defense staff under General Sani Abacha, was became the new head of state. And what he quickly did was to also set the country on a path to democratic governance. And it was that process that gave birth to what we now call the Fourth Republic, which we are in today. Don't forget, if you hear anything about the Third Republic, you will hear the botched Third Republic, because that republic was not allowed to actually fester. It was not allowed. It was overthrown again by General Sani Abacha. So that's why we normally say botched Third Republic. But we had the Fourth Republic, which was, set forth by the actions of General Salami Abubakar, who was the then head of state, who midwife what we call the 1999 Constitution, which we are currently using today, even though it has had several amendments and is still undergoing amendment. What were the fundamental features of the 1999 Constitution? One was the Democracy Day, of course, was restored May 29, 1999. And we had the presidential federal system. We had 36 states plus FCT. We have a bicameral legislation. And then, of course, we have fundamental human rights as set forth in Chapter 4 of the Constitution. Those were some of the key features. One, what are the challenges? There is a drawback, and which is largely the fact that it is criticized as a military drafted constitution with limited civil input. So it was a big issue. Until today, I'm sure you still hear the agitations that the 1999 constitution was not a people's constitution, because a constitution, as we earlier learned when we started, is a document that is drafted by the people through a referendum or through a consent assembly. That was not the case with this. And that's why it has continued to have some of the reviews that have been made. Please send me a text. Yeah, yeah. Where are we? Yeah. So beyond the 1999 Constitution, we've had several reforms that have taken place. So we've had the amendments and several of the amendments that have been done. One was we have electoral reforms in 2010. We have another reform in 2022. We have the financial autonomy for states, legislatures, and judiciary. All of these were some reforms that have taken place. We also have reforms around local government autonomy and so on. So, and then we have a very critical issue with the 1999 Constitution is the fact that restructuring and devolution of power is yet to be addressed. And of course, you can see, for instance, the states merely exist, yes, with some level of autonomy, but then there were still matters that are largely legislated by only the federal government. And there are those matters that fall within what you call the concurrent legislative list, which could be legislated by both the federal and the state. And usually, when you have the federal and the state legislate over a particular matter, it is the federal that carries the day, okay? By reason of our constitution, of course, which grants that level of supremacy. So the issue of restructuring and devolution of powers is one that has not been addressed, and it's a major issue that we still have to address to date. So in conclusion, it's important and safe to say that Nigeria's political history is actually replete with major constitutional development. And we've seen all of these developments over the period of time till date. As part of ongoing challenges, there is still debates on federalism, true federalism, issues around resource control, ethnic representation in, different positions and agencies and, departments and ministries of government is still a major issue. The need for constitutional reform to address the national question, which is our national unity and democratic governance, is still rife, and it has to be addressed. And finally, the evolution of Nigeria's constitution, of course, reflects how complex, our history and, diverse our society is. But, as is often said, there is strength in diversity. So we must, therefore, begin to look at how we can harness the strength in our diversity and not allow that to be a fault line that divides us as a people. So I think that's just my, presentation for us. I'm sure you might have one or two questions. Of course, we'll be ready to address that. Thank you, and over to you. Peace.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Okay, I can see the ED. Okay, ED, you can unmute.
This is Kolelawa, not ED.
Oh, sorry.
So I can go ahead, I guess. Thank you. Can I go ahead?
Just hold on. Just hold on.
Okay.
Just hold on for a bit. So thank you so much, sir. It's been an insightful ride this evening. So we're going to take questions. So if you have any questions, just indicate by raising up your hands. We already have people raising up their hands. So please, once it's your turn to ask a question, ensure that you keep it 30 seconds max, 30 seconds max, so that we can take as much questions as possible. Once it's 30 seconds, I'm going to be timing you. So Kunle, you
All
can
right.
unmute
Thank
and
you
ask
so
your question.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you, madam, as well. Thank you for your presentation. It's always interesting listening to you. My question is, why was the, the northern government, why was it delayed for over 2 years, right, before they were given that self-governance? And was there at any point in time where the north was placed ahead of other regions in terms of uh, ruling of this country? There are insinuations here and there as to that, and that is why I'm asking that question. Was there at any point in time where the North was placed at any vantage position, right, in ruling this country? And to your mind, sir, I will ask, the number of states that have been created, right? Is it uh, do we have enough states created, and was it not skewed to some parts by virtue of those that created those states? Thank you. Those should be my questions.
Okay,
Okay,
sir, over to you. I don't know if we should take one at a time, right? Is that
yeah,
okay, sir?
let's take another because another question may be addressed by the response I
Might
provided.
intersect. Okay. Okay, sir. So Ibrahim Umar.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me, please?
Loud and clear. Good evening. Just go ahead with your question.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful presentation. My own is just, I would say, well done. Thank you for sharing your wealth of experience and knowledge regarding the constitutional development in Nigeria. So my own is, you made mention on that before now, ministers are being nominated or appointed by the lawmakers, like the House of Reps or the Senate. But I didn't get that point clearly. But if it is like that, then is there a possible recommendation for you that let that policy be retrieved or be back to us so that the ministers will be not only the Senate to screen them, but the National Assembly have an influence or have a take or say in terms of appointing the ministerial list to assist the government so that for a constituency or senatorial district representation. That's my own take. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, please, let's have another question to that.
Are you there, sir? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jessica, I think since there are five, we'll just take all then you respond. Jessica.
Yes.
Jessica Gom, you can unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, sir. Good evening, peace. Good evening, everyone. I have two questions. The first one is, what exactly does this restructuring means? To be honest, I've just been hearing the word restructuring, and flying all over the place, and I've not really had a good grasp of what it means. That's the first question. The second question is, one of the problems that we have with our constitution is the fact that we do not have a sense of ownership of the constitution, and basically because of the criticism of the constitution that you said, which is the fact that it is handed to us by the military. Now the question is, would you suggest a completely new constitution, or the amendment of the constitution is okay, it will be sufficient to correct this deficiency? Because the National Assembly is currently on the process of reviewing the constitution. So do you think it's a good step? Do you think it's a step in the right direction, or you would rather we have a completely new constitution? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Usman Afolabi. You can unmute and ask your question. Usman Afolabi.
Good evening. My question is about something related to neocolonialism. So, in an age where we speak very much about neocolonialism, my question is about the fact that when the British did colonize Nigeria, they did have their intentions with what they intended to, how they intended to govern the Nigerian landscape. So my question is, upon gaining independence, was it that they were not able to fulfill their objectives, or is it that they are fulfilling their objectives in other ways, maybe through democracy? Or what's your view on this, sir? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Usman. Manasseh, the last question. Manasseh, you can unmute and ask your question.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, madam. I understand that in most countries, in terms of development, the number of states that country has help in developing that country. I also feel within me that if Nigeria must get it right and develop, I guess more states should be created. The question now is, why is it so difficult for the present constitution to make it a little bit easier for states to be created so that development will be ensued in Nigeria? Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Manasseh. Over to you, sir.
All right, thank you very much, Peace. And in addressing this last question, let me start from here because it will be addressing the question of the fourth speaker who talked about neocolonialism. Now, Nigeria is able to make the progress it made in terms of state creation because of military rule. If you look at it clearly, no state had been created by any civilian regime or civilian administration. It's basically through military decrees. So it's easier. So whoever sits at the helm of affairs is able to decree the states to be, and they be. But within our civil democracy, we've not been able to create any state. In fact, talking about states, even local governments were not created under the civilian administration. The closest attempt was the effort made by the state legislature in Lagos State under the current president when he was governor. And we have Olorunmugbe Mamura, who was the then Speaker of the Lagos State House of Assembly, and who presided over the planned creation of additional local government for Lagos State. At best, that effort ended up in the creation of what you call the Local Council Development Areas, LCDAs in Lagos State. When the matter was brought before the National Assembly, it was, thrown out. And that was how it ended. So you could see how difficult it is. And this is largely because of disagreements here and there, the issues of, parochial interests within the National Assembly. This all made it very difficult to actually create states and local government. You have issues around mutual suspicion. One region tells you, oh, you cannot create, we will not support the creation of this and so on. So we have imbalance, no doubt, in terms of distribution of, states across the entire federation. We have imbalance. And that, of course, is one of the reasons that have stirred the planned creation of additional states, which is also part of the current amendments that is in discussion today. So yes, states are a component, or states are supposed to be a component of development, because when you create states, you bring development closer to the people. And of course, we know that the local government brings development even more closer to the community. So the states are supposed to be components for component vehicles for development or to drive development. But whether that is the case is another big, question begging for answer. The issue of whether the colonial masters left off things they couldn't accomplish, and as a result are exploring opportunities or satisfying those things that they couldn't accomplish while they were ruling over these territories, is a very interesting one. And you asked to seek my opinion, and I'll tell you, every human is selfish in nature. Every human is selfish. Everybody is selfish. So don't tell me I'm not selfish. I'm selfish. We are selfish because it's nature. It's inborn in us. We are selfish to the extent that we want certain things. It is not wrong to want something. And so as nations, as a country, there are things that we want. Look at it. Africa is defined as Nigeria's centerpiece for foreign policy. What that means is that Africa is going to be the focus of Nigeria's foreign policy engagements and activity. It is for this singular reason that Nigeria, way back in the 70s and early 80s, Nigeria fought Burma War. Nigeria fought the Congolese wars. Nigeria fought for the liberation of the Southern African regions, the Kingdom of Lesotho, the Namibians, and South Africa as it were. I still recall vividly, down till the late 90s, we still had Nigerians who sit as justices of the Supreme Courts of those kingdoms in Southern Africa, okay, until date. We have within the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs what we call the Technical Aids Corps. It's an establishment of the government that provides human resource to support critical development in other parts of Africa. That's one. The Technical Aids Corps is still in existence. We have also the ECOMOG. The ECOMOG was set up for purpose of peacekeeping in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And we've seen the exploits of what Nigeria was able to do in these regions. Nigeria also was in Sudan under the United Nations Reserve Force, and several of them. So what am I trying to establish here? In doing all of this, Nigeria could, as a result of its intervention in these African countries and in other places, seek to advance its interest in those regions by making sure that, one, the process of infrastructure development in those countries is handled by Nigeria. But we lost those opportunities in both Sierra Leone, in Liberia, Central African Republic, and in many other places that we have supported. We lost those opportunities. But the Western powers don't lose sight of those opportunities. They always explore opportunities in other countries, and that's exactly why they are always intervening. So if you tell me if the colonial masters have some things they couldn't accomplish, I'll tell you yes. And what is that? Raw materials for their industries. And what are those raw materials? Our solid minerals, our black gold, that is oil. Of course, we know the companies involved in oil exploration with whom Nigeria entered into joint venture corporations, the IOCs. We know them. They are not companies owned by Nigerians. They are foreign companies. The Shell, BPs, and all of them. So the ExxonMobils, they are all there. So these companies further the interest of these colonial masters. So I love the fact that you use the word neocolonialism. Very true. So they further their interest. And they still working till today. So that perhaps might be what they couldn't accomplish before they left off. And they had to leave because Nigeria became self-governing when Nigeria became a republic in 1963. So they have to find other means, what we call diplomacy, diplomatic means of getting those things they would have, obtained from Nigeria directly through our own people. And it is happening till date. I hope I answered your question. I mean, the rest of which you can infer from yourself because you sought my opinion that I've given you. Now, the other question is about restructuring. So if you look at the present, remember when we started, we talked about centralism, we talked about justice, we talked about balance, we talked about, all of these key concepts that's very critical to democratic governance. So when you talk about restructuring, and the reason why it has remained a major debate in our political engagements and conversation is the fact that from the constitutional developments that we've had or evolutions that we've had, we have still not been able to have what you call a true federal state, in that, one, let's take state police. We do not have state police. We have a unitary police. How can you have a unitary police in a federal system of government? Remember, we define federalism in terms of the devolution of powers between, or the sharing and allocation of powers between the federal and the state governance. And we said that there are federating units in Nigeria. The federating units are the states. They are the states. So the federating unit ought to exercise some level of autonomy on matters of security. No one can police a state other than the people that come from that state. So you can't have a unitary system, especially for the police, in a in a federal system of government. That's why we keep talking about restructuring. That's one. Number two, still on the issues of devolution of powers. The whole issue about devolution of powers speaks to restructuring the country. Now look at it. There are three schedules of the Constitution. One is what we call the exclusive legislative list. The second is what we call the concurrent legislative list. And the third is what we call the residual list. Now, in the exclusive legislative list, it lists all aspects of our national life that only the federal can legislate over. That is, it's only the National Assembly that can legislate on matters listed within the exclusive legislative list. Now, you now go down, and they are wieldy. There are so many. You now go down to what you call the concurrent, where both the federal and the states have powers to legislate over those issues or matters that are defined within that list. Now look at it. Our constitution clearly says that if any other law is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution, that other law shall, to the extent of our inconsistency, be null and void. Now look at what happens. If the states and the federal legislate over a particular matter, let's say mining, for instance, the National Assembly makes a law and the State Assembly makes a law, which one will take precedence at the end of the day? It is the federal. At the end of the day, what it therefore means is that even the matters within the concurrent legislative list, you can simply infer that they still fall within the ambits of what the federal government can legislate. So what is left is a residual list, and which is very small. So we are saying you can't have a wieldy federal government presiding over the country when you have component states, that is the federating units. There, we should look at how we can move some of those matters that are within the exclusive list down into the concurrent list and empower the state to actually be able to make laws in those. So those are the reasons for the restructuring that we are talking about. The other component is also that Nigeria, as it is today, take the fiscal policy of this country. When you talk about fiscal policy, we are looking at, Nigeria's financial system. The Constitution says all revenue due to Nigeria shall be paid into the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the country, which is managed by, the federal government. And then every month, the federal authority sits with the state through what they call the FAC, Federal Accounts and Allocation Committee, to now disburse this fund. So the federal government disburses to the states, and then the states have funds that goes into the the states and local government account, which is still controlled by the states. But until recently, when the reforms were made and there was the resolution of the Supreme Court to the effect that all funds due to local government should go to the local governments directly. But of course, you and I know, as it were, that even those funds that go to the local government still find its way into the state coffers. But that's by the way. But what we are saying, we need to revert back to what it was in the eras of the Great Pyramids of groundnut in Kano. There was a dispensation where revenues were collected by the states and remittances made to the federal government based on a percentage. That's exactly what the agitations for fiscal restructuring actually speaks to, a situation where the states, look at it, the reason why our states governors are redundant, all our state governors without exception, they are redundant. And the reason is because they sit down and wait for allocation to come from the federal. Yet, in Nigeria, there is hardly a state in Nigeria that does not have one mineral resource or the other that it can mine. So, if you restructure the country to allow the states to have powers over resources that are within the confines of that particular state, what in economics we call comparative cost advantage will then begin to happen. And comparative cost advantage clearly stipulates that a state or a country focuses on developing those resources that it has in abundance. In Zamfara, you have lead. So if you have devolution or physical restructuring, you have a situation where Zamfara will comfortably mine what it has in abundance. You go to, it's still in Zamfara, you have gold. Gold is being mined in Zamfara. Whether that finds its way into the national coffers is another big issue because we hardly hear of that. All we know is oil, oil, oil. They've channeled all our attention to oil. What they are doing in other solid minerals, we do not know. Nigerians do not know, and no one is asking questions. The question we keep asking every day is how many barrels of oil? Oil is not the only mineral resource we have in Nigeria. There is gold. There is uranium. To even power nuclear infrastructure development in Nigeria. How are we exploring all of this? Because Nigeria is not properly restructured. This is the reason there is agitation for restructuring. I hope this clarifies the concerns you have with respect to the understanding of restructuring. The other twin point you made mention is the issue of ownership of the Constitution. Truly speaking, you see, there is a limit to what the National Assembly, I do not have faith in the National Assembly. And I speak to you as an individual, as a citizen, not, as a lecturer now. I speak to you as a citizen. I do not have faith. Are you aware that since 1999, we've had amendments of the Nigerian Constitution? Why is it that the National Assembly cannot just amend this Constitution wholesale so that we can have what is a semblance of a truly people's Constitution? Why? That's the problem. So it means that the National Assembly cannot give us what we have. They cannot give us what we have. It costs several billions to do those amendments, and we keep doing them every dispensation. So the attempts by, we had the last attempt was by President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, when in 2014, he established a national conference. And basically, the national conference was more or less like a constituent assembly. And I'm sure for those of you who were very much conversant with that process, you see that the process of election of those who went as representative was near, it was seamless. It was near representative of what it should be. You have different groupings at that conference. What did we do with the outcome of that conference? It's been thrown to the dustbins. It's sitting in shelves. Because when the Buhari government came in, he said he was not going to look at it. So all of the resources, the investments that went into that conference is sitting on shelves. This is what we do to ourselves. Political expediency. if you look at if you listen to some of the revelations coming up today, you will be very angry, very, very angry that someone came up and said, we knew that this man was right when he was going to remove oil subsidy in 2012, but we kicked against it. We mobilized Nigerians against it, even though we knew it was the right thing to happen, to be done. But it was all political expediency. So this is again the same thing that drives some of the failures that we have within our system and the reasons for why we have these continuous agitations for restructuring of this country until we have, because if you look at even the National Assembly as presently constituted, there is hardly anything they can do to give us the kind of constitution that we want. So if you ask me as a person, I'll tell you, I do not see anywhere that will make any progress with that. And talking about ownership, you can't own a constitution that is already defective. The constitution itself is already defective. One, a lot of activists will tell you that constitution is a big fat lie. He say we the people never met anywhere. And this is the truth. There was nothing like we the people never met. It was a military midwife constitution. We said it here. In fact, at the time that Obasanjo was sworn in, that constitution was not ready. It was not. Go and check the date it was decreed into law. Go and check. It postdates the inauguration of President Olusegun Obasanjo. But yet we had the constitution. So there are issues. Yes. Do they need to be addressed? Yes. Are we addressing them? That begs for answers. Finally, the issue of appointment of ministers from the federal legislature. This was the first question that was asked. So, yes, recall that under the Richardson Constitution at the time, what we had was a parliamentary system. Even though we had a significantly larger House of Representative membership with over 136 members, federal appointments into ministerial positions were actually drawn from the House of Representatives. So I'll give you another example to make it more clearer. Britain operates a parliamentary system of government. What that means is that people are elected into the parliament, and from the parliament, the ministers or cabinet members are then appointed. That was the same thing that was operational at the time. But today, that's not the case. We operate a presidential system of government. Remember, I said what the 1963 Constitution, which made Nigeria a republic, did for us was the elimination or the abolition of the office of the Queen. The Queen used to be the head, the titular head, what we call the ceremonial head. And then we had the Prime Minister. But the 1963 Constitution abolished that and adopted the presidential system of government, where we have the executive branch, we had the bicameral legislature, which is made up of Senate and House of Rep, and then we had the judiciary. These are the three arms of government that we have. So under the presidential system of government, it is the president that appoints a minister, and he appoints the ministers from anywhere. But our constitution defined that there should be at least representation from across the different states of the federation. So that's why the president makes the appointment in accordance, in a way that reflects federal character, and then sends it to the Senate for ratification and approval. That's exactly what happens. So I hope I've addressed all your questions. So thank you. Peace over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And I think that's the last question we have. I can't see any hands up, even in the chat. Just someone asking. So restructuring is simply to devolve power. I think that's the only question we have in the chat box. Is restructuring simply to devolve power?
It's
So
not.
maybe before us. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go
Sir.
ahead. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so I was going to say that maybe while responding to that question, you just give us your final thoughts.
So, in conclusion, really, restructuring is not just about power, but I've talked about, fiscal. We need to look at our fiscal structure as well. We need to look at that. That's why we talk about both devolution of powers. We talked also about our fiscal um, um, restructuring as well. And there are many things to restructure within the Nigerian constitution. It's not just, all about powers. But of course, talk about powers. Can you do anything if you are not given the power to do that? You must be given the power to do something before you can operate. So truly, if you say power, yes, I will agree with you. It's about power. Money is also power. That's talking about fiscal responsibilities of the state. So we need to look at fiscal responsibilities for states. We need to look at fiscal responsibilities for the local government. So if money goes to the local government, how do they give account? So we need to, all of this has to be clearly defined. The president told us recently when he was asked, the monies you said you were going to save from this fuel subsidy that you have removed, where is it? He said you gave it to the states. And, and it's so funny that you gave it to the states. You do not have a mechanism for ensuring that the states deploy those money for the benefit of the people. And then you're asking the people to go and check with the states. The question is how, sir? How will that happen? What are the legal frameworks established to ensure that there is accountability or that the people are able to hold their state? Is it in an environment where if you come out to even do a march, a walk to demand for something, you'll be arrested, you'll be tear gassed? Is it under that atmosphere that the people can demand accountability? Look, there is a lot to be done. So restructuring is all about this. How can we guarantee justice for the citizens? How can we guarantee justice? How do we ensure an egalitarian society? So we need to clean the origin tables and ensure that, we put mechanisms in place to ensure that what the people agitate for is not a basis for why the people suffer incarceration. So to say that restructuring is about power, yes, it is, but power at different levels. Power in terms of fiscal responsibility, power in terms of demand for accountability. We say, oh, the office of the citizen is the highest office of the land, but is it actually so? So these are thought-provoking questions I would like for us to go back home and begin to think through and look at materials and actually, reflect and see whether we are where we need to be. We are certainly not there yet. It's not yet Uhuru. It is not. But we need to operate and work together. The people must actually agree that they have suffered enough, they have labored enough to, agree to come together and work together to demand justice and accountability from our leaders, from those who are elected into public offices. Because the whole basis for the election is for service and not for self-aggrandizement. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the very best. Peace, are you there? Over to you. Can anyone hear me? Oh, there. Hello, Peace, can you hear me? Shalia, can you hear me? Shalia Gambo, can you hear me?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, this is back.
Okay.
Okay. Ambassador,
Okay, sorry. Sorry, sir. Okay, have you asked him to unmute, Chalia?
All right. Good evening, everyone. Good
No, I
evening,
was
sir.
handing over to you, Peace.
My name is Ambassador Babangida. Thank you very much for your lectures. I'm very, very impressed with the tour of history of our constitution up to now. There was a question that I had in mind, and you have talked about it, which is the 2014 that Goodluck Jonathan organized the confab. So my question is, why can't a reasonable Nigerian leader look into this confab? Because for me, I see it as the citizens' constitution. Because It was due to constitution issue that Jonathan deemed it fit to organize it. And I believe that conference result will solve a lot of things that they are just patching in the 1999 constitution. So that is just my question, sir. What is making our leaders not to look into it, if not for their own selfish interest? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. I think you have answered the question, so I will leave it there. So, peace, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for an insightful class. It's always nice and it's always educating having you come around. And I believe this is the second time you're doing this in this cohort, and I think the 19th time we're doing this with you. Always when we call, you respond to us and you answer. So thank you so much, sir. And to everyone present today, I would want to say congratulations for making it to class, for the knowledge gained, and I would also say that you will continue activities in your WhatsApp groups, your party WhatsApp groups. And of course, what you've heard today, do well to also share it with others. If each one can reach one, then each one can teach one. So ensure that you also step it down in your communities. And before you know it, literacy is going to become explosive. It's going to spread like wildfire. So thank you so much. Let's do this again. Classes will continue next week, Friday, but activities in your party and your assignments would still continue. So, Charlie, is there any announcement?
No, thank you very much, Physics. Thank you very much, Mr. Ivian.
Oh,
that'll be all for today.
Okay. Okay, so please let's all have a restful night. Thank you.